The unexpected encounter. It was a bright and sunny afternoon when Jake decided to take his dog, Max, for a walk in the park. The air was fresh, the grass green, and the sky was clear. It seemed like the perfect day for a peaceful stroll. Just him and his loyal furry companion. Max, a mischievous but loving golden retriever, always found a way to make their walks a little more interesting. As they walked along the path, Jake noticed the usual peaceful sounds of the park. The chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the trees, and the occasional laughter of children playing nearby. Jake smiled. It had been a busy week, and this little escape to the park was just what he needed. Max, however, had other plans. Jake's thoughts were interrupted when his dog suddenly tugged at the leash, pulling him towards the bushes off to the side of the path. Max was barking excitedly, his tail wagging furiously. Jake tried to calm him down, but Max was too excited. "Hey Max, what's gotten into you?" Jake muttered, trying to pull his dog back onto the path. But Max was determined. He darted off the path and into the thick bushes, still barking wildly. Jake shook his head and followed. "Max, come back here," he called, feeling a bit annoyed. He didn't want to spend the afternoon chasing his dog around. As Jake stepped into the bushes, he saw something strange. Max had stopped barking and was sniffing something on the ground. It looked like a pair of panties. Jake blinked, rubbing his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things. It was definitely a pair of panties, and they were in Max's mouth, hanging from his teeth like some kind of treasure. "Max, what did you find now?" Jake asked in disbelief. He was more confused than anything. Who would leave something like that in the park? His dog, wagging his tail, dropped the panties at Jake's feet, clearly proud of his find. Jake bent down to pick them up, unsure what to do. He didn't want to just leave them there, but he wasn't sure if he should take them with him. Before he could decide, he heard a soft laugh from behind him. It wasn't a human laugh, though. It sounded almost different. He quickly turned around, startled by the sound. Standing just a few feet away, watching him with a curious smile, was a woman. She was tall, with glowing skin that shimmered in the sunlight, almost like she wasn't quite from this world. Her hair was a strange shade of silver, flowing down her back in loose waves. She had a look of calmness about her, but something in her eyes told Jake that she wasn't just an ordinary person. Jake took a step back, unsure what to make of her. Was this a prank? Was someone playing a joke on him? But there was something about her that made him pause. She didn't look like anyone he had ever seen before. There was something otherworldly about her, like she didn't belong in this park, or even on Earth for that matter. Can I help you?" Jake asked, feeling awkward. He still held the panties in his hand, unsure if he should explain why he was holding them. The woman smiled, her lips curling up in a way that made her look both beautiful and mysterious. "I believe you have something of mine," she said, her voice soft but confident. Jake frowned, glancing down at the panties in his hand. "These are yours?" he asked, surprised. He had no idea how this could be possible. There was no way this woman could be connected to the panties his dog had found. The woman nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, those are mine," she said, her gaze never leaving Jake's face. She stepped closer, and Jake instinctively took a small step back, unsure if he should trust her. "I'm sorry, but I don't know how these ended up here. My dog found them," Jake explained, holding them out towards her. The woman didn't seem fazed by his confusion. Instead, she looked at him with an amused expression. "It's all right. It's not the panties that matter," she said, her voice still calm. "It's you." Jake blinked. "Me?" he asked, confused. "I don't think I've ever met you before." The woman smiled again, her eyes glimmering with something Jake couldn't quite understand. "Oh, but we've met before, in a way," she said cryptically. "You just don't remember." Jake's confusion grew. He felt like something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Was this some kind of joke? Was she messing with him? "I'm sorry. I don't understand, Jake said, feeling more uncomfortable by the second. What do you mean? The woman's expression softened, as if she understood his confusion. Let's just say I'm here for a mission, she said, her voice low but intriguing. And you are a part of it. Jake's mind raced. What kind of mission? What was she talking about? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Max barking again, now at his feet, trying to get his attention. The woman glanced down at the dog, her eyes narrowing slightly. He seems to like you, she said, her tone more thoughtful. Interesting. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what was going on, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary encounter. He had no idea what kind of situation he had just walked into, but he had a feeling it was about to get a lot more complicated. Who are you? Jake asked, his voice shaky. The woman smiled again, this time a little more knowingly. You can call me Lyra. And just like that, Jake's peaceful walk in the park was over. What had started as an innocent afternoon with his dog was quickly turning into something much stranger, and he was about to find out just how deep this mystery went. The alien's introduction. Jake stood there, still holding the panties, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. Lyra, the mysterious woman with the glowing skin and silver hair, watched him with calm eyes that seemed to pierce straight through him. There was an eerie sense of serenity about her, but it only made Jake more uncomfortable. It felt as if she wasn't just some stranger in the park, but someone who knew more about him than she let on. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Max, Jake's dog, seemed unusually calm around her, almost as if he recognized her presence. The dog sat down at Lyra's feet, wagging his tail slowly, as if nothing about this encounter was strange. Jake could feel his own heart pounding in his chest. His dog was acting like this was the most normal thing in the world, but Jake had a strong feeling that this wasn't normal at all. Who are you really? Jake finally asked, his voice uncertain but growing more insistent. The woman's smile softened, but her eyes remained distant, almost as if she was weighing how much to reveal. My name is Lyra, she said again, this time more gently. I come from a faraway place, a world far beyond the stars. I didn't mean to surprise you, but I suppose my presence is inevitable. She glanced down at Max and then back up at Jake. I've been watching you. And your dog, of course. Jake frowned, trying to process what she was saying. Watching me? Why? What do you want with me? Lyra took a step closer, her presence almost magnetic. The air around her seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself was bending just slightly. It's not so much about wanting you, Jake, as it is about needing you, or rather, needing your help. She looked at the panties in his hand, her expression thoughtful. That object, though it seems small and insignificant, is actually very important. It's part of something much larger than you can imagine. Jake blinked, his mind racing. Important. It's just some random pair of panties my dog found in the bushes. He laughed nervously, but it didn't seem to faze Lyra. She seemed calm, too calm for someone talking about something so absurd. It may seem that way to you, but the universe has a funny way of connecting things, Lyra explained. Her voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable authority behind it. What your dog found is a piece of a much bigger puzzle, a puzzle that involves not just Earth, but the very fate of many worlds. Jake's mouth went dry. He was still trying to make sense of everything. His logical mind couldn't handle the idea that this strange woman, this alien, was talking about saving the universe. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie, not something that could happen to a regular guy walking his dog in the park. Why me? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm nobody. I'm just a guy with a dog. Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, she stepped forward, standing just inches from Jake. That's exactly why it's you. You're ordinary, and yet you're not. The universe always finds a way to bring the right people into the right places at the right time. Her eyes held his, steady and unblinking. You see, Jake, The universe is in danger, and your part in it, whether you realize it or not, is crucial. Jake took a step back, still holding the panties like they were some kind of explosive device. He looked at Lyra, then at Max, who was still wagging his tail, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. Was he imagining all of this? Was this some kind of prank? But the strange, shimmering glow around Lyra, and the calmness in her eyes, made it impossible to deny that she wasn't human. You're saying the panties are important, because they're connected to the fate of the universe, Jake repeated, his voice cracking slightly. That doesn't even make sense. Lyra gave him a small, knowing smile. I understand how difficult this all is to believe. It's a lot to take in. But sometimes, things don't make sense until you look at them from a different angle. What you see as insignificant might be the key to saving everything. She paused, glancing at the sky as if considering something. You've been chosen, Jake. Your role is part of a much larger plan that started long before you were born, and it will affect everything you know. Jake shook his head, his mind spinning. He had always lived a simple life. He wasn't a hero, wasn't anyone special, just an average guy. How could he possibly be a part of something so big? I don't get it, he admitted, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Why me? Why now? Lyra looked at him with something like sympathy in her eyes. Because there's something special about you, Jake. You're more connected to this than you realize. This mission, this puzzle, it's all been leading to you. I can't explain everything yet, but I need your help. There are forces at play that are far beyond our control, and your world is about to become the battleground. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. His head was still reeling from everything Lyra had said, but the sincerity in her eyes made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. Help you with what? Jake asked, his voice trembling. Lyra took a deep breath, her expression growing more serious. There are others like me, Jake. We're part of a resistance, but the people we're fighting, they're dangerous, and they're coming for your world next. Jake didn't know what to say. He felt out of his depth, caught in something much larger than he could have imagined. But as he stood there, facing this strange woman who was so sure of herself, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn into something completely unexpected. Lyra stepped back, her eyes never leaving his. I know this is overwhelming, but trust me when I say, you don't want to be on the wrong side of this. The fate of your world, and countless others, depends on what you do next. And with that, Jake knew, deep down, that everything he thought he knew about life was about to change forever. The mysterious mission. Jake stood there, feeling like his world was tilting on its axis. The weight of Lyra's words hung in the air, pressing down on him. Resistance, forces at play, the fate of your world. Those were words he never thought would be part of his vocabulary. The idea that he, a regular guy, could play a role in something so massive felt surreal. Yet the strange glow in Lyra's eyes, the shimmer in the air around her, made it impossible to ignore. Max sat calmly by Lyra's side, his tail wagging lazily, as if everything was perfectly normal. Jake, on the other hand, felt like he was losing his grip on reality. What was going on? This wasn't supposed to happen. He was just taking his dog for a walk, not getting tangled up in an intergalactic war. Lyra, I don't understand, Jake said, his voice a little shaky. He glanced down at the panties still clutched in his hand, the object that seemed to be the cause of all this madness. What does this all mean? Why is this item so important? Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. It's not just the item itself, Jake. It's what it represents. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. It's a piece of a much larger puzzle. The panties, while seemingly trivial, were used to send a signal. A signal that brought you into this. Jake felt his pulse quicken. A signal? What do you mean? Lyra glanced around, her gaze shifting to the trees and the distant park bench where an elderly couple sat enjoying the sunshine. oblivious to the strange events unfolding nearby. She lowered her voice even further, making sure no one else could hear. This isn't just a simple mission. It's part of something far older, far more dangerous. What you hold in your hands is a marker. It was deliberately placed here, in your world, to draw me in. The powers that be, the ones I'm fighting against, they've been searching for it. For the right moment to strike, and they believe they found it. Jake blinked. This was becoming more confusing by the minute. But why here? Why Earth? Why me? Lyra's gaze hardened, her expression becoming more serious. You're connected to this, whether you know it or not. The people who are after me, they've been watching Earth for a long time, but they weren't always as powerful as they are now. In fact, they used to be just like you. She paused for a moment, watching Jake closely. They were human. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. Human? You're saying they were humans like me? Yes. Lyra nodded. Long ago, Earth was part of a larger alliance of planets, but that alliance fractured. Some humans, driven by power and greed, turned their backs on everything. They made a deal with a force much darker than anything we can comprehend. Now they've become something else. Something dangerous. Jake's heart raced as he tried to wrap his mind around what she was saying. So, these humans, they've turned into aliens? Not exactly, Lyra answered, her voice somber. They've mutated, become twisted by the power they sought. They've abandoned their humanity in favor of control. They're no longer just human, but something much more terrifying. They want to take over the galaxy, and Earth is the next target. Jake's head spun. His stomach churned with the realization that he wasn't just dealing with some crazy person in the park. This was real. The fate of his planet, his home, was at risk, and he was somehow tangled up in it. But what does this have to do with me? Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's gaze softened again, as if she understood the weight of the question. You've always been a part of this, Jake. You just didn't know it. The resistance that I'm a part of. There are people across the galaxy, people like me, trying to stop the invasion. But we need help from Earth. Your world is more connected to the universe than you realize. You've been chosen to play a role in this, whether you believe it or not. Jake's mind was a whirlwind of questions. I'm just a guy who likes to walk his dog in the park. I'm not a soldier. I'm not some space hero. Why would anyone choose me for this? Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. It's not about being a soldier, Jake. It's about courage. It's about knowing that sometimes, when the world is at its darkest, ordinary people can make the biggest difference. You've been chosen because you have something inside you, a strength that, when the time comes, will make all the difference. Jake felt a mixture of doubt and curiosity rise inside him. He was no hero. He didn't even know how to fight. He was just a regular guy with regular problems. How was he supposed to stop an invasion? You're asking me to join a war I don't understand, Jake said, shaking his head. I don't know anything about alien forces or resistance movements or saving the galaxy. Lyra smiled slightly, the faintest hint of amusement playing at the corners of her lips. I know it seems overwhelming, but you don't have to know everything, Jake. You just have to be willing to stand up when it matters. And right now, it matters more than you know. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. The weight of the decision was heavy, but as he looked at Lyra's unwavering eyes, something stirred within him. Could he really be a part of something this big? Was he really going to risk his life for a cause he didn't fully understand? Okay, Jake said, his voice quiet but determined. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll help you. Lyra nodded approvingly, her eyes lighting up with a quiet relief. I knew you would. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, glowing device. This will help us stay in contact. It's connected to my ship. You'll be safe as long as you're with me. Jake stared at the device, his mind still reeling from everything that had just been revealed. This was it. There was no turning back now. "Thank you, Jake," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "The fight isn't over, but together, we have a chance to win." And with that, Jake knew that his life would never be the same. He had just stepped into a world he never knew existed, and the journey was only beginning. The strange connection. Jake's mind was still reeling from the shocking revelations Lyra had shared with him. One moment, he was walking his dog in the park, and the next, he was tangled up in an intergalactic conflict. Nothing about this made sense, and yet, every fiber of his being told him that this was real. Max, his ever-loyal dog, seemed blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation. He was still sitting beside Lyra, wagging his tail happily, as if nothing had changed. It was almost as though the dog had known Lyra for years. Jake couldn't shake the strange feeling that Max was somehow connected to this too, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. As Lyra began to speak again, her tone more serious than before, Jake tried to steady his nerves. "You're going to have to trust me, Jake," she said softly, looking at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "What you're feeling right now, this confusion, this disbelief, it's all part of the process. I know it's a lot to take in, but everything is connected. You're connected to all of this." Jake took a deep breath, trying to find his bearings. "I don't get it," he admitted, shaking his head. "How am I connected to any of this? I'm just a guy who likes to take his dog for walks. I don't know anything about resistance movements or alien invasions." Lyra's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him. "You don't need to understand everything right now. You will in time. But just know this. There is something inside you, something special. Your connection to this fight, it's not random. It's been written into your destiny for a long time." Jake looked at her skeptically. "Destiny? Look, I'm just a regular guy. I don't feel any different than I did yesterday." Lyra smiled, her eyes filled with a knowing wisdom. "That's the thing, Jake. You don't feel different because you've been living a life that's part of the plan. Everything you've experienced, every choice you've made, has led you here, to this moment. You've always been a part of something much bigger than you realize." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. "So you're saying I've been chosen for this destiny?" His voice was laced with doubt. "Why me? Why not someone else? There must be someone else out there who's better suited for this." Lyra's expression grew more serious. "The people we're fighting against, the ones who used to be human, they'd been searching for you for a long time. They'd been watching Earth, watching you, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they found you, when they found Max, they knew you were connected to the power they seek." Jake's mind was spinning. "Max? My dog?" He looked down at his furry companion, who was still acting as if this was just another day in the park. "What does Max have to do with any of this?" Lyra glanced at Max, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Your dog is not just a dog, Jake. He's a part of this too. He's connected to the universe in a way you can't yet understand. He's been protecting you, guiding you, even though you didn't know it." Jake stared at Max, feeling a sudden rush of confusion and disbelief. Max was part of this too. He was just a dog, a playful, energetic companion who loved chasing squirrels and barking at mailmen. How could he possibly be involved in some grand cosmic struggle? "I don't get it," Jake repeated, more to himself than to Lyra. "How is any of this possible? How is any of this real?" Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm and calming. "I know this is hard to believe, Jake, but trust me, you'll see the truth soon enough. There's more to this world than you can imagine, more than anyone could have prepared you for." Jake felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Fear, confusion, curiosity. He was drowning in it all. But there was also something else, something deep inside him, telling him to trust her. There was something about Lyra that made him believe she wasn't lying, that she wasn't just some crazy person, but someone who had answers. Answers that could help him understand what was happening. "Okay," Jake said after a long pause, his voice quiet but determined. "What do we do next?" Lyra's eyes brightened, and she gave him a reassuring smile. "Next, we need to leave the park. We can't stay here much longer. The people we're running from are tracking us. They'll know we're close soon. We need to move quickly." Jake nodded, trying to gather his thoughts. "Where are we going?" "To my ship," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "It's not far, but we need to stay ahead of them. Once we're aboard, we'll be safe, at least for a while." Jake looked down at Max, who was still sitting calmly beside Lyra, looking up at him with those big, trusting eyes. It was hard to believe that this ordinary park, this ordinary walk, had turned into something so extraordinary. But here he was, standing at the crossroads of something bigger than he could ever have imagined. And somehow, he knew that there was no going back. "All right," Jake said, determination settling in. "Let's go." As they began to walk away from the park, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Where was this journey going to take him? What would he find out about his connection to all of this? And most importantly, could he really help save his world from the darkness Lyra spoke of? But in that moment, as he walked beside Lyra and Max, he realized something. Whatever was coming, he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The alien pursuers. The air in the park was starting to feel different now, heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Jake's every step felt like it was leading him further away from everything familiar. Max trotted along beside him, still unusually calm despite the growing tension. Lyra, ahead of them, moved with purpose, her silver hair glistening in the fading sunlight, as if she wasn't affected by the anxiety that had started to creep into Jake's chest. He tried to focus on his surroundings, but everything felt strange now. The park, the trees, even the gentle breeze, all of it seemed somehow alien, like he was no longer walking through the place he knew so well. His thoughts kept circling back to the same question. What was going on? Why had this been his life, his reality, for the last few hours? And what had Lyra meant when she said he was part of something bigger, something tied to the fate of the world? Suddenly, Max's ears perked up. The dog stopped in his tracks, his body tense, eyes scanning the distance. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Max had never acted like this before. There was something off. "Max," Jake called softly, his voice low. The dog let out a low growl, his eyes focused on something Jake couldn't see. Lyra's movements slowed as she glanced over her shoulder at Jake, her expression unreadable. "We've been spotted," she said calmly. Jake froze, his stomach dropping. "Spotted? By who?" Lyra's gaze flickered to the sky, her eyes narrowing. "By them. The ones I'm running from." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the world around them seemed to shift. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and suddenly, the peaceful park that had once felt so safe was filled with an eerie stillness. It was as though time itself had slowed down. "Come on, we need to move quickly," Lyra urged, her voice still calm, but with an edge of urgency. "Stay close." Jake could hear faint footsteps, distant at first, but growing louder with every passing second. He turned toward the sound, his pulse racing. It wasn't just one set of footsteps. There were several, all coming closer. The feeling of being hunted hit him like a wave. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Lyra moved with speed that Jake couldn't even process. She grabbed his arm and pulled him along, urging him to run. Max barked, jumping in front of Jake as though to shield him, his eyes still fixed on the unseen threat. They ran through the park, weaving through trees, ducking beneath branches. Jake could feel his breath coming faster, his legs starting to ache. The park, once a place of relaxation, now felt like a maze, an obstacle course they had to navigate before the pursuers caught up. Lyra's speed was astonishing, her movements flowing as if she were made for this kind of escape. She didn't look back, but Jake could tell she was aware of everything around her. She was leading them toward something, though Jake couldn't see what it was. His mind raced, trying to figure out what exactly they were running from. "Who are they?" Jake gasped, his chest burning from the exertion. "Why are they chasing us?" "They are the ones who were part of the alliance. The ones who turned," Lyra answered, her voice steady, but tinged with something dark. "They were once humans, like you, but they're not anymore. They've become something much worse. They call themselves the Nokori. They're a twisted version of what Earth used to be. A weaponized race now, bent on taking everything for themselves." Jake's head was spinning. "Humans, turned into aliens. And they're after you. After us." Lyra nodded grimly. "Yes, the Nokori were once part of the resistance. They believed in unity and peace, but when they started to seek more power, more control, they turned against everything they fought for. Now they've become merciless. They've destroyed entire worlds, wiped out civilizations." Jake's blood ran cold. "And now they're coming for Earth. They already know about Earth," Lyra said, her voice hard. "That's why they're after me. I know too much, and I've been able to stay one step ahead. But they found us, Jake. The moment you got involved, you became a target too. They won't stop until they get what they want." A noise echoed behind them. It was the sound of boots, heavy and deliberate. There was no mistaking it now. Whoever was chasing them wasn't hiding anymore. They were closing in. Jake's mind raced. He didn't know if he was ready for this. He wasn't a fighter, didn't have the strength or the skills to take on alien pursuers. He was just an ordinary guy, wasn't he? But everything in his gut told him that there was no turning back. Not now. If he didn't fight back, if he didn't help Lyra, what would happen to the Earth? Max barked loudly, his stance now defensive, his tail straight. The dog was ready to protect them. It made Jake feel a little braver. Maybe, just maybe, he could stand his ground. "Lyra, what do we do now?" Jake asked, his voice steadying despite the chaos swirling around him. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her eyes flashing with resolve. "We make a stand. We're not running anymore. They need to understand that we won't be easy prey." She suddenly slowed, stopping near a large tree. She crouched down, quickly adjusting something at her wrist. In a moment, a strange, humming energy filled the air, and a small glowing object appeared in her hand. It wasn't a weapon, but some kind of device, its surface shifting as if it were alive. "They won't expect this," Lyra muttered, more to herself than to Jake. "Get ready." Max stood in front of them, growling again as shadows began to shift near the trees. Jake couldn't see them, but he felt their presence, the eerie weight of their pursuit closing in. Suddenly, from behind the trees, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in dark armor, with eyes glowing an unnatural shade of red. Behind it, more figures followed, all wearing the same black, heavy armor. Jake's breath hitched. They were here, and they weren't alone. Lyra stepped forward, her voice cold and commanding. "If you want me, you'll have to get through us." The Nokori had arrived. A dangerous escape. The Nokori closed in, their glowing red eyes piercing the shadows as they stepped from behind the trees. The cold weight of their presence pressed down on Jake like a physical force, and his heart hammered in his chest. He felt every inch of the air grow heavier, as if the very atmosphere around them was charged with danger. They weren't just after Lyra. Jake knew that now. They were after him too. And that thought made everything in his life feel like it had been flipped upside down. Max barked fiercely, positioning himself between Jake and the alien pursuers, his teeth bared, his fur bristling. The dog was ready, but Jake had no idea how they were going to get out of this. He wasn't armed, wasn't trained in combat, and in this moment, it seemed like everything was stacked against them. Lyra moved with quiet confidence, her eyes locked on the lead Nokori soldier, who was slowly approaching. The creature's armor glimmered in the dim light, a dark, metallic sheen that radiated malice. It wasn't human. Jake could see that clearly now. Its posture was rigid, predatory. The long, angular limbs and the smooth, almost featureless face sent a shiver down Jake's spine. "They found us," Lyra said, her voice steady, almost detached. "But we can't stay here. We need to move." Before Jake could respond, the Nokori soldier raised its hand, and the air around them seemed to ripple. The oppressive silence was broken by a low mechanical hum, followed by a flash of blue light. A beam of energy shot from the soldier's hand, crashing into a tree just a few feet from them. The tree splintered and cracked, sending shards of bark flying. The power of the blast made the ground tremble beneath Jake's feet. "Run!" Lyra shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. "Now!" Max barked once more, charging toward the closest Nokori soldier, but Lyra grabbed the dog's collar just in time, pulling him back. "We're not fighting them here," she snapped. "We don't have the firepower for this. We need to escape." Jake didn't need another explanation. He turned and ran, his legs pumping furiously as Lyra and Max followed close behind. They dashed through the trees, weaving through thick brush, every instinct screaming at him to move faster, to get as far away as possible from the aliens that were closing in with terrifying precision. As they ran, Jake could hear the sound of the Nokori soldiers giving chase. Their boots hit the ground in perfect unison, and the faint hum of their energy weapons followed. The tension in Jake's body was overwhelming. He could feel the weight of his decision to run settle heavily in his chest. Every muscle screamed for him to stop, to turn around and fight. But he knew Lyra was right. This wasn't a fight they could win. Not yet. Lyra led them toward the edge of the park, where the dense trees began to thin out. The sky above them was dimming, the sunset just a sliver of orange on the horizon. Jake tried to keep up with her, but his breath was ragged, his legs burning with the effort. He wasn't used to running this hard, this fast. "We're almost there," Lyra called back, her voice laced with determination. She didn't seem winded at all, like she had an endless supply of energy. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure Jake and Max were still following. Ahead, Jake could see a break in the trees. There, just beyond the open field, was a small hill where a metallic structure glinted in the fading sunlight. A ship. It was sleek, like nothing Jake had ever seen before. It wasn't some old, crumbling spaceship from a sci-fi movie. This was something advanced, something powerful. It was Lyra's ship, and it was their only chance. The Nokori soldiers weren't far behind. Jake could hear the rustling of their armor as they closed the distance. His heart pounded in his chest, and he pushed himself harder, ignoring the stitch in his side. They had to make it to the ship. If they didn't, they wouldn't survive. Lyra reached the ship first, and with a quick motion, she activated something on her wrist. The ship's hatch opened, a low whirring sound filling the air. "Inside. Now," she shouted, already stepping into the ship. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed Max's leash, pulling the dog inside, his legs moving almost on autopilot. They didn't have much time. The Nokori were only moments away. Just as Jake stepped through the hatch, he felt the ground beneath him tremble again. A blinding blue light flared from behind them. The Nokori were shooting, trying to hit them before they could escape. The blast struck the ground just inches from the ship's hatch, sending up a cloud of dirt and rocks. Lyra slammed the hatch shut with one swift motion, sealing them inside. The ship hummed to life, and Jake felt the familiar sensation of lifting off the ground. They were rising fast, the park below shrinking quickly as they gained altitude. But as the ship ascended, Jake dared a glance out of the small window by his seat. The Nokori soldiers were still there, standing in the park, looking up at them. One of them raised its hand once more, but the ship's speed was too much. They were out of range before the Nokori could launch another attack. Jake exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing heart. They had made it. They were safe, at least for now. He looked at Lyra, who was sitting at the controls, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "They won't stop," she said quietly, as though reading his thoughts. "But we have time. We have a chance to regroup." Jake nodded, though a part of him still felt the rush of panic. He'd barely processed what had happened, what was happening. But now, as they shot higher into the sky, leaving Earth behind, one thing was clear. Everything had changed. The world he'd known was gone. And now, there was no turning back. The final showdown and revelation. The ship's interior was silent for a moment, save for the low hum of its engines as they zoomed further away from Earth. Jake sat in the cockpit, the vibrations of the ship reverberating through his body. Max lay at his feet, panting but calm. Lyra was focused, her fingers dancing over the control panels, guiding them through the atmosphere with practiced ease. Her expression was intense but composed. Too composed, as though she had been through this 1,000 times. Jake leaned back in his seat, trying to steady his breath. It felt like his entire world had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. 1 minute, he was just a guy walking his dog in a park, and now he was on a spaceship, fleeing from a race of mutated humans bent on conquering the universe. His thoughts raced, trying to catch up with everything that had happened. Lyra broke the silence, her voice steady, but carrying an underlying tension. "We've escaped for now, but it's not over. They'll find us again. And when they do, we need to be ready." Jake turned to look at her, his voice edged with disbelief. "You mean, we're still being hunted, but we just escaped them?" Lyra nodded grimly, her eyes never leaving the controls. "The Nokori are relentless. They don't stop until they get what they want. But it's not just about me anymore, Jake. It's about you. You're the key to stopping them." Jake felt a chill run down his spine at her words. "Me? How am I the key? I'm just..." He stopped himself, frustrated. "I'm just a guy. I can't even understand half of what's going on, let alone stop an alien invasion." Lyra's gaze softened, and she looked over at him for the first time since they'd taken off. "You don't need to understand everything right now. What matters is that you have something they don't know about. Something inside you." Jake's heart beat faster. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "The Nokori have been searching for you for a reason. There's a power in your bloodline, Jake, something they've been trying to unlock for centuries. It's been dormant in humanity for as long as you've existed, but it's growing stronger now. And they're afraid." Jake's mind was swimming. "A power? You're saying I have some kind of hidden ability, but I don't feel any different. I'm just me." "You're not just you," Lyra said, her voice firm but kind. "There's more to your DNA than you know. Humanity, at its core, was once meant for something greater. Your ancestors were part of something vast, a network of worlds. But Earth was isolated, forgotten. The Nokori know this, and they've been trying to find the key to unlocking your potential." Jake stared at her, trying to make sense of it. His ancestors, a hidden power. It was too much. But why me? Why now? I've never done anything special. I've never even left Earth. Why would they come for me? Lyra looked down for a moment, her fingers still moving across the ship's interface, as if she were searching for something. "You were always part of it, Jake. Everything you've ever done, every choice you've made, brought you here. The Nokori don't know the full extent of what they're facing. But you do. You have the power to end this, to stop them. You've always had it, deep down. It's in your blood." A wave of disbelief washed over Jake. The idea that he, just a regular guy with no special skills or history, could have anything to do with stopping an alien race seemed impossible. But Lyra's certainty left little room for doubt. There was something more to this. And now, as they sailed through the stars, it seemed like the only way forward was to accept it. "Okay," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. "So, what do I do now?" Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. "You're going to learn. We'll train. But first, we need to head to a place where the Nokori can't find us. Somewhere I can show you the truth about your potential. Your bloodline is the key to the power that will bring balance to this war. But there's a twist, Jake. Jake frowned. A twist. She nodded. The Nokori are already aware that someone on Earth is awakening the power. They've been hunting for it for a long time. And now that they know where to look, they'll stop at nothing to find it. The truth is, they don't just want to rule the galaxy. They want to use this power for themselves. They think that by controlling it, they can reshape the universe in their image. But if they succeed, Lyra trailed off, the weight of her words sinking into Jake's chest. They'll wipe out everything. Every world. Every life. Including Earth. Jake could feel the magnitude of her words hitting him with full force. The weight of what was at stake was impossible to ignore now. His own life, the lives of everyone he knew, and the entire future of Earth. He was at the center of it all. But we can stop them, right? Jake asked, his voice trembling slightly. He wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure himself or Lyra, but it didn't matter. I mean, if this power is inside me, we can win, right? Lyra gave him a small, encouraging smile. We can. But it's not going to be easy. You'll have to face parts of yourself you don't understand yet. You'll need to tap into that hidden potential and learn how to control it. And when the time comes, Jake, you'll have to decide. Do you fight for yourself or for everyone else? Jake swallowed hard, the gravity of her words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. He wasn't ready. He didn't have the experience, the skills, or the knowledge. But there was no time to waste. He had to prepare. Earth's future depended on him. It had to. As the ship sped toward their next destination, a place Lyra called the Sanctuary, Jake sat back in his seat, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He had been thrown into something far beyond his comprehension. But now, more than ever, he understood one thing. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about saving everything he loved, everything he knew, from a force that had already destroyed countless worlds. And somehow, he was going to stop them.